Well, something that doesn't struggle at all from melody and hooks is our last album, and that's Tom Petty. So, Matt, go ahead and run it for us, and then I always seem to get the very traditional albums that I'm the first take on. So, Matt, you go ahead.
As Tom Petty once said, "Don't bore us, get to the chorus."
There you go.
Tom Petty's and the Heartbreakers' "Damn the Torpedoes" comes in at number 168 in the 1970s, number 12 in 1979, number 726 of all time. It's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' top-rated album on Best Ever Albums, but it's if you want to include Tom Petty solo, it's second behind Full Moon Fever, which is an album we're actually going to cover in the 1980s on a proper episode. And it did make Rolling Stone's list, coming in at number 231. Which is also the highest-rated album both tonight in Best Ever Albums and Rolling Stone.
Here's a guy that should have been the Traveling Wilburys.
You might even say he was, Josh. So, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like every Tom Petty album, feels to some degree like Tom Petty's greatest hits, doesn't it? It's just kind of.
I mean, yeah.
Which era of Tom Petty you're doing greatest hits? So he's in some ways, Tom Petty is such a traditional lane. It's just old school rock and roll synthesized in whatever era he's in. I think that's why Tom Petty kind of felt like an ageless artist too, because the Tom Petty of like 1979 and the Tom Petty of like 1995, right? It doesn't feel like he's much different. Like the music might sound different, but it's like It's Tom Petty, right? It's just who's Tom Petty. I mean, even like it's funny to think that Tom Petty had this career as this pretty influential music video guy, because you wouldn't think like Tom Petty, guy that would translate well to, but he did. I mean, almost no one, can't think of like the "Don't Come Around Here No More" where they're cutting up the Alice, in Wonderland cake, that's the person, that always comes to mind, and Free Fallin', and just a Last Dance with Mary Jane, right? There's all these videos that are
Running
iconic.
Down a Dream, the cartoon.
The cartoon. Yeah, they're iconic, to use an overused word right now, but that's there. It's like this album. I always feel the same way about Tom Petty. I like the Tom Petty album, but you just wait for the singles to some degree, and then the only knock I have on Tom Petty sometimes is I feel his best tracks are his singles, and the deeper cuts. There's very few deep cuts of Tom Petty that I'm like, ooh, now there's a deep cut to be aware of. It doesn't mean that the deeper cuts aren't good songs, because the singles are such good songs that I think almost the rest of the albums can be hurt by that, in the sense that the singles, you just know, and they're like excellently written pop songs. We talked earlier about how there's similarities between Elvis Costello and Tom Petty, and there certainly are, for sure. That was something I don't know if I'd noticed as much until we covered both of them recently. There's an old school 50s, 60s rock and roll vibe to Tom Petty all the time, which is sort of how he's similar to somebody like Bruce Springsteen, in that they kind of come from that same great American. I think they even have the same thing. It's like I even all the way down to like the voices that are fun to imitate, like the Bruce Springsteen voice, that's kind of that weird accent, and the Tom Petty voice that's like twangier, but it's always like I saw Elvis and he blew my mind, and I knew I wanted to pick up a guitar and write a song and start a bit. Like they're kind of the same origin story to some degree. Just Tom Petty's a little younger, and in that's why in the Traveling Wilburys, I think the antecedent to that is Roy Orbison, right? And then he leads into the rest of them, right? And that, I think that was even the idea. And but what can you say about this? There's like songs that I'd be shocked if anyone over the age of like 35 didn't know, like Refugee and Only the Losers, Even the Loser, excuse me, and
Don't Do
Me Like That. These are all songs that still get played on the radio all the time right now.
Yep.
So yeah, I like this album quite a bit. I didn't have the level like I did with the Cars, where I listened to it and it suffered, but it had a little bit of that where I was like, there are people doing the Tom Petty thing, and when I put them in the context of 1979 was somebody like Elvis Costello doing stuff that was more interesting to me as singer-songwriter. Yes, that doesn't take away from Tom Petty, but it did help contextualize things a little bit, if that makes sense. So
Well, Tom Petty kind of transcended that in some way, because I was thinking about, that earlier.
Well, I haven't even mentioned the production, which is ridiculous. Yeah. It's what's his name? Jimmy Iovine, right? Like, who did this. And yeah, it sounds like a Bruce Springsteen album. And that very clean production, which later Tom Petty continued with people like Jeff Lynne and stuff. It's always like a clean production. And yeah, that's the other thing that jumps out, is this has a production that you'll immediately recognize. So,
yeah. So I love Tom Petty. This is the opposite of madness / ska for me, because there's sentimental value all over Tom Petty's music for me. I think I probably liked Tom Petty in terms of the quote unquote classic rock artists that were that I was exposed to in my childhood. Tom Petty was probably the first one that I liked, and I think I liked Tom Petty right away. I like the Beatles, so I guess I would throw them in there, but like I felt just an immediate connection with Tom Petty.
I guess I like the Beatles. What?
No, yeah. I'm trying to say, because like I always feel like anytime the Beatles are in a conversation, I always have to just I have to exclude them, because they can't count when I normally talk about other aspects of music.
Matt's like a baby boomer, like 20 years afterwards.
Kinda.
Like everything's Beatles. It's like the people who are everything's Nirvana, Nevermind. Like in this era, he's the Beatles.
I am for the Beatles, but the first time I wasn't terribly into Springsteen the first time I heard him. I wasn't terribly into Neil Young or Crosby, Stills and Nash or The Who or the Rolling Stones, any of that stuff. But Tom Petty I've always really liked, and he definitely is a singles act. I don't own many Tom Petty albums, but this is my favorite era of Tom Petty. Like this is, to me, when he hit the most. I think he always said that his favorite album was Wildflowers, and while I like that album, to me it's the stuff that he hit in these the mid 70s through mid 80s, like that 10-year frame is just like to me his best. And there's some of the best stuff on here. When you've got The Refugee, which, God, that might be my favorite Tom Petty song. Like that's just such a fantastic song. That guitar riff, his vocals on it, the bridge is great. They're leading into the chorus, and then you've got maybe my second favorite Tom Petty song, which is Even the Losers. That's just that's a great song, and that's a song that's a rarity for me, because the lyrics are great for that song. And of course John, you're
really
gonna say it lines up with me.
They resonate with you, even the losers.
They don't no. They don't necessarily resonate with me, like it's like on a personal level. But I just think, I guess they resonate.
They
with me
are
in the sense
sentimental.
That,
I'll say that, and yes. I think that's why. Because it's funny, because Tom Petty, the human being, is hilariously non-sentimental, but he writes like Springsteen level sentimental songs, which always was a. Because Springsteen, the human, is also as sentimental as Springsteen, the songwriter. Right, but like Tom Petty was not, which always cracked me up, because his songs were very, American Girl comes to mind, right? Like, but
it's just like
that
it's
makes
kind
sense,
of like,
Matt, because you're sentimental. So
it kind of there was this moment that was it's about this girl that he kind of hooked up with this one night, and it was that was it, and she wasn't going to be with him after that. But he was just like, man, that was a great night, and it's it's sad because I want to recapture that or make it more permanent, but I can't. So there's a little bit, I get nostalgic, so that kind of that's a little bit more in line with the type of person I am.
Were you the loser in that song? Is that
I'm always a loser, John. I'm always a loser.
No, I'm just laughing because I'm like that. You're owning that, and like basically the chorus is like even the losers get lucky.
I look at more of like it's just just like like looking back on a time that this was a great time, not necessarily a particular person or whatever, but more of just like just a different time in my life where that was a fun summer or something like that, But anyway,
gotcha.
But to me also, so you've got those songs.
Were you with Mary and the Shore, like with the Springsteen songs?
Yes,
Mary and Jukebox Johnny and Sloppy Sue,
John.
Yeah, Big Balls Billy.
Yeah, Tom Petty doesn't do that as much, does he?
No, he doesn't. He's a little more coy.
But John, it's funny you bring up deep cuts, because to me the other thing I like about this, the icing on the cake, is this has maybe my all-time favorite deep cut. I love You Tell Me. that song. I've always liked that song. And when I it's one of those Tom Petty songs that I forget about. And then when I saw it on this record, I was like, oh, yes. I was so excited for that. So Louisiana Rain's another really good deep cut, too. That's a really, the closing track is really good. Great chorus. And yeah, you're right. Great production overall. I do know that, this wasn't a fun album to record for the band, and Iovine was kind of a workhorse, kind of like Mutt Lange that we talked about last week with AC/DC. It was just like had them redo takes and do this over and redo that and double track this and stuff like that, and they were kind of exhausted, but they were really happy with the results of the record. So I don't think there's a dud song on here. There might be songs on here like Century City doesn't stand out as much as some of the other songs, or maybe What Are You Doing in My Life? Maybe that's the other weaker track. But I think Shadow of a Doubt's a really great song, and it's got 4 classic, Petty singles on it.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, all-timer songs.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What is your favorite Petty song of all time?
I was thinking about that earlier.
It might be Refugee.
Well, let's go there now before we go over to Josh.
I'm going to have to look now.
Yeah, that's always up.
I really like Breakdown. That's a good song.
That's good. I think I like Refugee better.
Stop Dragging My Heart Around is
That's
mine.
a
I know
really good one.
it's his, and Stevie Nicks got put on it, but that's probably my favorite Tom Petty song because it's clearly a Tom Petty song that just.
Well, he wrote it, and he wrote it for Stevie Nicks because she did Insider, which is on Hard Promises.
Oh, I always heard the story was he wrote it, and then Jimmy Iovine was dating Stevie Nicks, and then he gave it to Stevie Nicks, and Petty got kind of pissed off about it. That's the story I've always heard.
Oh, we might have to clean that stack. I always thought that they did Insider, and she did him a favor by coming on that. So then he wrote a song to do with her. And it went on to Stevie's Nicks album. But maybe we'll have to look that up.
I think Don't Do Me Like That is my favorite song on this album.
Really?
For sure. Yeah.
Oh, mine's Refugee on this album for sure.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, I mean, Tom Petty doesn't reinvent the wheel. He just really refines it to the perfect wheel, because I think that's what he does. It's almost similar to, in my mind, to the way the Rolling Stones are. They just take blues and elevate it. I think Tom Petty just takes rock and kind of elevates it as well. He just has a way of, we've said the strength of the singles on this album are overshadow the rest of the album, but I find this album consistent all the way throughout, and the singles themselves have just transcended singles of rock music in general to be some of the best singles ever. So his songwriting and the way he crafts songs is his strength, and is kind of what everyone I think loves about him, and in some ways is what's underappreciated about him, in that you kind of forget about everything else, like you guys were saying on his album. But I think he writes really good songs, and I'm not going to say anything there is no hot take with Tom Petty for me. He's just a good artist, and he makes catchy songs, and there's some indelible quality to them that's appealing. He takes elements of all these other artists that we've listened to, like the Beatles. I feel like Century City could be a Beatles song on some level. It reminds me of a Beatles song, and he takes those and makes them his own and gives them to the masses, where he's an artist that everyone likes on some level. And we all named our favorite songs from him, but everyone else has other songs that they love by him, and he's an artist that I can't remember who else we said was like this, but everyone appreciates on some level, or can find something that they like. He draws on the elements of blues in this album. The piano is featured prominently. There's definitely a honky-tonk country element to many of these songs, like What Are You Doing in My Life? I noticed even the Losers. I always love, I feel like we don't get enough tambourine on the albums that we listen to, and even Losers has tambourine, and that along with hand claps that's like 70% of the way there to me liking a song, if you include one of those or both of those elements. So I don't think I ever really listened to a Tom Petty album before, because his greatest hits essentially are enough to carry you through. So I appreciated listening to it structured in this way, and And yeah, I enjoyed it. Also from Gainesville, right? Gainesville,
Yes,
shout
he is
out
from Gainesville.
before he left, but
Although I don't know if he loved Gainesville when
no,
he was
I think
there.
he left.
No, he wasn't a
really-
big fan.
Yeah.
Wasn't a big fan.
Which, to be fair, I can see, but
Yeah, he didn't have the easiest childhood.
especially back then,
read-
probably different than when we were there. But
yeah, he didn't.
think it
He
was-
didn't. He
yeah.
didn't have. He didn't have the nicest dad and environment there. But I think that there's some universal quality to Tom Petty that like, I don't know. It's hard not to like Tom Petty, or it's hard. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, yeah, he's got too many songs that just, I don't know. They're just very easy for people to get down to, I think.
yep. I think a mirror. This popped in my head. A mirror to Tom Petty in like a bizarro bad way is like Steve Miller. It's like the worst qualities of Tom Petty for me, and they never work. And they're both striving for the same thing. But
There's a lot of people though who in a 6-disc changer would have Tom Petty directly next
Yeah.
to Steve Miller Band.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's an interesting thing about that though, Josh, because they represent the yin and the yang for you, but for other people they'd be like, I can't believe you say that there. So that is interesting. Like, what is it secret sauce wise that takes an omnipresent artist and makes them insufferable for you and makes them timeless for you?
Yeah.
Yep.
Another good chord, because I like Tom Petty. I don't know if I like him as much as you guys do, and that's not to say I don't like him, but I feel like once you hear Tom Petty, you've heard Tom Petty. I think another interesting corollary of him in terms of sophisticated is Elton John, because Elton John is another guy that just spams singles. I think the biggest difference for me is the fact that Elton John always seems to be able to reinvent himself, whereas with Tom Petty, Billy Joel is another one, kind of like he's the shticky version of Tom Petty, and that like instead of doing the same thing all the time, Billy Joel tries different stuff, but he kind of always sounds the same, but you just do a different. He's the bizarro for me, and that like he would do all these videos, but I thought they were super corny, whereas Tom Petty would do ones that would like elevate the song. So yeah. So
I also have to say I'm amazed at Tom Petty's range, because if you ever listen to him talk, he's got such a deep voice.
yes,
And some of the notes, like the chorus on Refugee, God, he's going so high on that. And I know Iovine's doing a lot of production with that, but no, he's still hitting those notes. So I think Tom Petty probably, my guess would be one of those artists that just has like a higher end of the range. Like he's just able to cover so many notes.
he's also one of the great like mumble people of all time too. Like, you hear somehow, somewhere, somebody used to, that type of, like, not everybody can do that kind of,
Well,
Dylan can do it when he's on, and that's absolutely who he's doing, by the way.
Right.
Is Dylan.
I mean,
And he leans into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he's
It's
definitely
like,
like, okay, well, this is gonna, and maybe that helps him get those high notes and stuff.
It's
but
almost like onomatopoeias, something about it, like, and it's all like kind of like designed to just sound like sounds. So
yeah, but he makes it his own voice. I mean, it's like it gives it definitely a distinctive quality to it. So, Tom Petty when you hear him.
Oh, and part of it is because the Heartbreakers have a sound too. I can always tell when he's with the Heartbreakers or not, because they have like a quality of like one of the best backing bands ever. They're a tremendous backing band that probably doesn't get the credit they deserve. And they were around. I think it was like they were around and just traded out. I think they traded out their bassist after doing it for years, and then they went with that for a while, and then the one bassist died, and then they brought back the original guy.
Well, the original Ron Blair was the original bassist who's
back,
who ended up back with them, but I think he quit. It was one of those things where I think he got like stage fright, or he had to go like raise his family or something like that. Like he ended up quitting, and they brought in Howie Epstein, who carried on for a few years before he passed. But
like
but
15, I think, or something.
What's that?
I think it was like 15 years he was the bassist.
Yeah, they were both bassists for quite some time, and they also fired the drummer Stan Lynch eventually, because he was kind of the rowdy guy, like the party guy that never really was serious about anything, and I think he eventually just got on people's nerves, and they finally kicked him out. So
he's like the guy. He's like Joe Walsh from the Eagles.
I forgot. Yeah, that's story. So
Also, very interesting that we will be covering him Full Moon Fever in 1989, a full decade after this album. We'll see what.
Well, and I think we'll cover
no difference.
We'll probably cover Wildflowers too, and that's like 95, right?
Okay. Yeah. Oh,
Wildflowers we are not covering unless you got it on a cold listen, John.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe
that was
I would have thought that would have been. Yeah, okay.
It was in 94, and it came in at it's currently ranked at 194 in the 90s.
Oh, wow.
It's like we said, was it the Rolling Stones? There's not many artists that we cover like span multiple decades.
Well, yeah, Petty would have been one of the ones I thought would have had a chance. The other one that shows up in, was it like King Crimson? Who is it that we're like to see in the 80s and we were shocked by it?
Yeah.
I think it might have been like King Crimson, right? Is like in there 3 times.
3 decades,
yeah, they are. They are on the list.
But I think that speaks to Tom Petty's. He's not known as an album guy.
Yeah.
You know, like he's got great singles. He's got several awesome singles on every album, but there's not like an album that stands out like this. And he's also like churning out very similar stuff. He's just doing it really, really, really well.
But there's a lot of artists like that who sold a jillion albums in the album time without me thinking of them as album guys. Like Depeche Mode, right, was one that I remember that shocking thing where I found that there was a period where all 8 Depeche Mode albums sold like 1.5 million copies. And like when I think of Depeche Mode, I think of like a series of singles, right? Enjoy the Silence,
Jesus.
Personal Jesus. I don't think in any, like, I know they have like Violator and people are like, and we're going to listen to those. But like in no way do I think of like a Depeche Mode album. I think of them as just a series of singles mixed with like weird videos from the late 80s, early 90s.
But I wasn't talking so much about sales, because obviously Tom Petty albums sold a ton. I was talking about like critical, acclaim.
Sure.
And same thing. I just looked up Depeche Mode. Depeche Mode, they sold a ton of albums, but we were only covering 2. You know, so it's Tom Petty's. Yeah, his album.
Well, we're only covering 2 Tom Petty albums too.
I mean, 2 albums in the proper. We're only doing 1 Tom Petty in the proper episodes.
Okay. Oh, I hear what you're saying.
There's 2. Violator and Music for the Masses both made top 100, and one in the 80s and one in the 90s. So.
Yeah, that's a weird corollary for me to draw. But you get it. It's just somebody that sold a lot of albums while being a singles artist.
But as far as critics go, like Tom Petty's not, he's not known for like, this Tom Petty album's like this transcendent record. It's really good,
Right.
These songs are meant to be played live too. That's another thing that we didn't really mention. But yeah.
Well, that's kind of why it's on Cold Listen Hot Takes, right, and not a proper album in the 70s in some respect.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. It's on the made Rolling Stones list. So.
Yep.
All right. Well, interesting.